You're a physician. You've spent years mastering medicine, but deep down, you know your impact could be bigger. What if you could take your clinical expertise and use it to shape the future of healthcare without leaving medicine behind? I'm Dr. Allison Kerfman, and I went from being a practicing physician to a startup leader, launching a multi-nine-figure company that's transforming care for 35,000 children. And now I'm ready to show you how. Join the Startup Physicians Launchpad, a 6-week course designed to give you the tools, strategy, and connections to break into healthcare innovation. Whether you want to consult or advise or even launch your own venture, this is your roadmap. Spots are limited, so visit startupphysicians.com and register now. Your expertise is too valuable to stay on the sidelines. Let's change the future of healthcare together.
I think the advantages of doctors coming into the business sector is that we can go very deep, right, on any kind of subject matter. We have the breadth of understanding of human physiology, pathophysiology. Many of us have practiced in the clinical setting and understand what those conversations are like when you're actually explaining like a new diagnosis to a patient or the pros and cons of drugs. And so I think that comprehensive component of being a physician and a scientist really do help immensely in the healthcare sphere and many business processes and decision makings. First and foremost, you should believe that you can do it because it is completely possible to transition from a clinical career as a physician to work into the startup sector. There's immense need for more and more physicians and folks with real good, deep-rooted clinical experience to be in startups.
Welcome to Startup Physicians. Please like and follow our show to join our community of physicians who are reimagining healthcare delivery. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Startup Physicians. I'm your host, Dr. Allison Kerfman, and I am excited to introduce you to my guest today, Dr. David Lim. He is traditionally trained as an infectious disease physician, but his career has taken a number of different turns that led to so many interesting opportunities and chances to make really great impact on healthcare. And so thanks a lot for coming on the show, David.
Yeah, my pleasure. Real pleased to be here, Allison.
Awesome. Well, I would love if you could start by just telling us a little bit about your journey and how you started and then what actually got you into this field.
Yeah, no, I would say it stems all the way back from really a love of science and medicine. And I was really a biochemist at heart. Couldn't decide between whether just to go to med school or go to grad school. So decided to do both, an MD and a PhD degree, and very well down that traditional pathway of an academic career. I was working as an infectious disease specialist at UCSF. Working in the wet lab, and I kind of hit the pause button in 2010, well over 14 now, almost 15 years ago, and took a moment to really ask myself, like, is this the path I really want to continue? And while very meaningful and very fulfilling, I just kind of forced myself to ask, are there different ways I could drive impact in the healthcare sector? Are there different aspects of healthcare beyond academics that I could leverage a lot of my skills and knowledge? And I kept coming to the notion that the business side of healthcare, where you can drive a lot of your impact in a very scalable fashion. Unlike other physicians traditionally in academia, I decided that I would just take a leap and get really essentially my business exposure by becoming a management consultant, and joined the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, initially first and foremost to get some exposure to pharmaceutical.
How did you even find out about that opportunity?
What I did was I really just spoke to a number of my friends who were physicians who were not in academics, and really asked, like, how did you decide to become a private practice physician? I did have a handful of friends who did try consulting as a route. Some folks went straight into pharmaceutical industry. And so it's really gathering all those data points and striking out to see what might be a good path to get involved with. And consulting was one of the pathways that just seemed to fit very well.
That's amazing. Did you have to move for that job? Which office were you in for Boston Consultant Group?
Yeah, so I was located in San Francisco, and I had the opportunity to actually stay in San Francisco, but I'm an East Coaster, and my wife is also an East Coaster, and our parents were like, "You got to get back to the East Coast. We want to see the grandkids," and so it was just a nice fit to move in back in the New York City metro area, and I was in the New Jersey Boston Consulting office.
Very cool. So I'm assuming that your experience there may have felt a little bit like my experience when I first moved into a private equity firm, that all of a sudden everything is totally different.
Yes, I think the world is somewhat turned upside down, if you one way to describe it, because in academia and especially infectious disease, it's a very deductive process. You gather as much information as you can possibly can, and then arise to a conclusion or an answer. Where in the business world, I had to rapidly turn around that process and start with an answer and just get enough data to get myself comfortable, right, with an answer that's 60, 70, 80% sure. And in the business world, I think that you get very accustomed to doing that because it's much faster, it's much more iterative. And I think BCG was a wonderful place where I could just learn how to do that again and again and again.
That's great. And I'm assuming you were working on healthcare concepts at BCG, where I'm assuming it also spanned the whole breadth of healthcare and wasn't just focused on infectious disease. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what was wonderful is that a lot of the case exposure, the clients are really designed to be 2, 3, 6 month engagements. I had a really wonderful broad experience in the pharmaceutical world, doing a lot of strategy work, new product launch, consumer insight studies, reorganization work, even in the big, large pharma companies. It really got me immersed into understanding the business process, what it takes to set up a business and maintain it, and just like a lot of the hard decisions that have to be made when businesses are running. But I also had great exposure, did wonderful work with the Gates Foundation, which leveraged a lot of my infectious disease training to do some innovative, groundbreaking scientific work on HIV prevention strategies. The real kind of turning point for me was I did a 1-year secondment with Professor Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, and we launched a nonprofit organization, really that 0 to 1 phase where we had this concept around value-based healthcare and harnessing doctors and scientists together to really align outcome measurement together. And we launched this organization, and that's kind of how I caught the bug for startups.
So that's awesome. I feel like when you get some visibility into how businesses are built and how they approach problems and questions, and then have the experience of actually building one yourself, then it is an iterative and replicable process. It's like you could build a infectious disease company, or you could build a value-based care company, or you could build, what I know you've gone on to build other companies too. Were you continuing to practice medicine at that point?
I had decided not to. I was pretty focused on just building my business skills and network, and just being fully immersed in all things consulting at that point. So yeah, I had not continued.
Do you feel like you were using your scientific background as a PhD in a lot of the work that you were doing?
I would say yes and no. I would say certainly for the Gates Foundation work, there was a lot of heavy science involved there. But I would say but I think what you can really apply from your kind of the academic and medical knowledge is that the ability to really think thoroughly, think more comprehensively with a clinical hat on about a specific problem, really think deeply about. I think the advantages of doctors coming into the business sector is that we can go very deep, right, on any kind of subject matter. We have the breadth of understanding of human physiology, pathophysiology. Many of us have practiced in the clinical setting and understand what those conversations are like when you're actually explaining a new diagnosis to a patient, or the pros and cons of drugs. And so I think that comprehensive component of being a physician and a scientist really do help immensely in the healthcare sphere and many business processes and decision makings.
I feel like sometimes doctors don't realize how much they actually know. We are used to like working our way up this academic ladder to become more of an expert along all against like all of the along all the training and then like you said going out into the business world like you're never going to be like the top expert who knows, the answers aren't 100% clear all the time and but at the same time we do have this very broad skill set including analytical thinking and how to measure. Anyone who's done any research knows how to create metrics and measurement and understanding the value of creating an evidence base for something. So I think that sometimes doctors don't recognize how many skill sets they actually have trained into them that could be very applicable to this field.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that the degree of rigor, the degree of critical thinking, problem solving is inherently very unique to doctors. And I would, and then right underneath that, I would really apply that the whole notion of team-based work, right? And especially when if you're very accustomed to inpatient hospital work, the need to drive decision making to make very, very critical, sometimes life-saving decisions under extenuating or pressure situations. And so I think the ability to think clearly and to apply a framework and to work with other team members those skill sets are very, very valuable in the business setting. And I don't think doctors realize that all the time.
Do you think there are tendencies that physicians have that could hold us back in this area? Like things about the way we've been trained that make it harder to operate in this area?
I would say the one thing I had to do to get comfortable is I think in the hospital setting or in the laboratory setting, if you're 5% unsure about your answer, you go and drive and try to find that last 5% of data, right, to get to 100% confidence on what you're doing. And I think doctors have to get comfortable, and I had to learn how to do this. I think I mentioned this earlier, but just being comfortable, like if 10% of my answer is not correct or might be wrong, or even 20%, right? But it's good enough to keep things moving forward. I think in the business sector, we're more often than not, most often than not, we're not making life or death decisions, right? Especially when it comes to setting a strategy or creating an implementation process, or even hiring individuals. Like, so it's the pressure is not quite the same as what you might be accustomed to dealing with in the patient situation.
Yeah. And I think about building some of our initial business models and how, there's like hundreds, if not thousands of assumptions that are going into these very complicated Excel sheets that kind of map out all the revenue streams and costs and everything. And some of those lines were things that came directly out of my brain. It's like, oh, well, what percentage can we affect this? And it's like, you don't actually know. You're going from a gut feeling and you're making a best guess and you're probably going to change it later, but you're bringing these like hundreds of variables together to come up with an answer to try and determine like, what is the ROI of this? Or is this going to be a meaningful business that will be able to sustain itself?
That's right.
But there's no like peer-reviewed journal, evidence base on like every single piece of information that we have to bring to an assessment like that.
Yes, that's right. And so the degree of scrutiny is not the same. They're not even comparable, honestly, academics versus business, right? I think we're inculcated into the belief as physicians that you will be asked, like, if there are 100 questions to ask about what happened to the patient last night, you're expected to answer all 100 questions, right? And that's not the same in the business setting. And so having that comfortability and the confidence to know that your gut is right is something I've had to learn over the years.
And also working with individuals in industry and in business who respect and value the clinical perspective, because I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of companies that very deeply respected the clinical perspective, but I also have encountered some that don't care as much about that. And so I think choosing who you work with and who values your viewpoint is also really important.
Yes, and I think when I do think about the companies that I've built up from the ground up and the people I've worked with, it is very much that element of healthcare has not changed for me. And that is very much the commitment to great clinical quality, the commitment to patient first, right? And doing things that don't really go counter to the mission of helping patients, right? Achieve better health and doing it in a way that, at least for my mission, is to do it in a way where we're not endlessly driving up costs, right? In
Yeah.
the healthcare system.
So you started this nonprofit focused on value-based transformation. What was next after that?
Yeah, so again, I think all things, whenever you're in these inflection points, you start talking to people and saying, hey, like I've had these experiences over the last few years, these are the skills I've gained, right? And that was like all my consulting skills. And then just, again, starting to talk to your network to say, hey, what ideas or what other people have you known with similarities to me, and what have they done? And I'm very interested in this startup space. And so I was able to network into some of the discussions with some of the venture firms from my work after launching this nonprofit. And a number of the venture partners, well, what you've done has a very nice fit with Castlight Health. And Castlight was one of the very first companies that created a platform that really cast light on healthcare costs and quality. And it was a platform that was really sold into the employer space to enable employees to really look at healthcare costs and quality information in a very organized, really almost a consumer-like interface to help them shop effectively for healthcare services. And they were seeking somebody with a clinical background who had a lot of experience in the value-based healthcare world, and they were building out a clinical team to help really design the clinical components to the platform. And so I joined up, and it was my first experience in a startup. And it's wonderful.
I find that co-developing technology as like the clinical mind that's working directly with a team that's more of a tech team is one of the more fun things that I've ever been able to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's such a great creative environment where you're able to take a lot of that clinical backbone and the clinical experience and the perspective and understanding of the persona of the patient, and then blend it with someone who understands how to make information readily organized and relevant, and a really beautiful user interface that really helps that individual get to the right place, in the most wonderful experience possible. And so it's always been a lot of fun to work with the product teams and the engineers to help, not only to help them understand the world of healthcare better, but then to have them help you understand how to deliver healthcare services better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a bi-directional learning. And I feel like one of the things that really resonates with physicians when I talk to them about doing this sort of work in startups is that in traditional healthcare, creativity is not encouraged. It's just not part of you don't want to be creative with like how you're going to treat septic shock. Like we have protocols, we have very clear ways of doing things, and we operate in environments that are structured for a reason, but it's not a very creative environment. And I think that that's one of the things that has been most fulfilling for me, and it sounds like you really emphasize that too.
Yeah, it's very easy as a physician in your day-to-day work to just accept the process, accept the status quo. But I agree. I think that a lot of when it comes to medications or procedures or clinical guidelines, like that makes sense. But there's so many different things about healthcare that do have room for creativity and or improvement. Ideally, both. The ability to take technological solutions to really impart better data analytics, to impart a better decision-making process, to eliminate many of these manual things that still happen all over the country today. And so I think that there's this incredible area of robust creativity that can come to bring efficiencies and just a better experience overall for all, from provider to patient to family members, and I think that's why we see so much hope and promise in these tech companies to just continually improve our healthcare system.
Absolutely. So after Castlight, what was the next venture for you?
Yeah, so I had the fortune of getting introduced to the founder of Quartet Health, and this was even before there was any fundraising whatsoever. It was just, again, kind of similar, harkening back to my experience with Harvard Business School and Michael Porter, but this was just a concept at the time. And I think I was so driven by this notion. This was back in 2014 of improving access to mental health care, and as well as really just shepherding and giving a patient really that compassionate guidance and navigation and support into mental health care. I would say that it was something that I saw very lacking as a practicing physician, on my own patients when it was clear they had mental health care issues, but I just had nowhere to turn to help them. And I think even when we started Quartet, it was very clear that the stigma of mental health was just so immense. And so I think personally, it just was like a very important mission for me to start something in this space. Took another leap of faith and joined the company even before there was any fundraising. We went out and were able to land a Series A and really just begin of building that company.
You're a physician. You've spent years mastering medicine, but deep down, you know your impact could be bigger. What if you could take your clinical expertise and use it to shape the future of healthcare without leaving medicine behind? I'm Dr. Allison Kerfman, and I went from being a practicing physician to a startup leader, launching a multi-nine-figure company that's transforming care for 35,000 children. And now I'm ready to show you how. Join the Startup Physicians Launchpad, a 6-week course designed to give you the tools, strategy, and connections to break into healthcare innovation. Whether you want to consult or advise or even launch your own venture, this is your roadmap. Spots are limited, so visit startupphysicians.com and register now. Your expertise is too valuable to stay on the sidelines. Let's change the future of healthcare together. It's so interesting to me how, as you progress through your career and different experiences and opportunities to work on different healthcare concepts, you continue to expand your reach. And I bet when you left San Francisco, you never thought you'd be like starting a mental health company as an ID doctor.
Absolutely not. But it's interesting because I think going back to the physician experience, right? It's very clear. Yes, I'm formally trained in infectious disease, but why did mental health mean so much? I mean, and I think the story is very much that, like, I had a patient who was newly diagnosed with HIV, and very easy for this patient to start an HIV antiretroviral regimen. But it was clear that, every time they were not taking the medicine, they would come up with some excuse that they forgot to get the prescription or they were confused. We would try to simplify the regimen, but it took me literally a couple months until this person really told me that they felt so ashamed about their HIV diagnosis, and they still lived with their mother and then were hiding the pills. And so it was clear that I had missed the boat completely on, their anxiety and their depression. And I felt like I didn't serve this patient well enough, right? Because I missed something entirely. And so I think these relatable experiences as physicians, when you see that actually you are and have been at the front line of many of these issues that really just come to the forefront. And again, we talked about process improvement, or just, it would have been great if I had been prompted on hey, HIV and depression, anxiety are very common. You should be screening for this, whether it was through an EMR or whether it was just through training or both, right? And then have a solution at hand, like Quartet, hey, I have someone who specializes in newly diagnosed in HIV, and they can help you tomorrow, right? And so, understanding the problem, where things are breaking down, and a vision of a solution is just I think physicians can see that arc very easily.
And some of these problems in healthcare are so pervasive across specialties. They affect everything. They affect, even if you're not, like we said, a mental health care physician or provider, you see it every day, day in and day out. And
That's right.
you also have the added perspective of having had thousands of patient encounters, and you will have had so many conversations, and we see patterns. I don't think doctors always recognize how valuable that is, to know pattern recognition and what sorts of things cause people to have trouble in the healthcare system. They feel really obvious to us, but it's not always obvious when all you have to go off of is, claims data or some other source that, a bunch of investment bankers or tech, developers are looking at. And I think that this perspective, of this very human perspective of things that we carry with us as we practice medicine, is something that carries over into this world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, tech can always help anything in the world, really. But it's when you have those moments of real kind of intimate connection with a patient, and real empathy of understanding what they're going through and what the struggles. And I think too much of medicine we get so focused on our little silo of what we're doing, and I need to just write my antiretroviral prescription and call it a day, and I got 10 minutes and I got to go to the next patient. And we get too focused on like a singular problem versus thinking comprehensively. And I think that's why physicians have this ability to enter startups to add immense value, because they've been at those really intimate moments with patients and can empathize and understand that comprehensive kind of journey that the patient's going through.
So what was after Quartet for you?
Yeah, so I did work for a health insurance company for a little bit, took a little break from startups, led a mental health care division for a few months, and then we transitioned that company. It was actually, the health plan was sold to Anthem, and then we transitioned into the Medicare Advantage space. And I did that for 2 years, building a Medicare Advantage provider line. But the startup world called me back, and I had outreach from the Hospital for Special Surgery and Orthopedic Institute here in New York City. And during the pandemic, they had this epiphany that a lot of the musculoskeletal triage and treatment that they performed very well in person, and during the pandemic, they realized that they could do it with equal quality virtually. And rather than license this technology or the clinical assets and algorithms out, they decided to create a company. And that company's name is RightMove. And they asked if I wanted to be one of the building team members. And the more I looked into this, the more I saw that there was real value creation in having a very, highly accessible virtual first musculoskeletal triage for any kind of joint or muscle or pain that one might be experiencing. And it's such an incredibly important first step to somebody's musculoskeletal journey, because as the problem as it is today, patients and even primary care doctors don't know where to start, and it may start with an MRI, or it may start with a CT scan, or a pain specialist, or a joint injection, or an orthopedic surgeon who might unfortunately put you on the operating table unnecessarily. And so you can see this confusing, web of how to enter the musculoskeletal healthcare space could be really simplified with a very readily accessible tech first triage. And then if it's treatment through virtual, you can also get that done very well. And so I joined up as, again, another employee number one, and started this company about 2.5 years ago.
That's amazing. You seem like you've gotten experiences to kind of try a lot of different things over the past few years. I think it might be easy for doctors who are listening to this podcast to say, oh, I'm nothing like him. He worked at Boston Consulting Group. What would you say to people who are actually interested in this work, but find themselves thinking like, oh, there's no way I could ever do that?
Yeah, well, I think the first and foremost belief is that you have to believe. I mean, you should believe that you can do it, because it is completely possible to transition from a clinical career as a physician to work into the startup sector. There's immense need for more and more physicians and folks with real good, deep-rooted clinical experience to be in startups. I would say second to that, speak to me, speak to Allison, speak to folks who have done it, and we're here to help. We're always, I think most, as I've gone through all these transition points and inflection points throughout my career, just speaking to folks and discussing ideas, and being able to adapt your ideas to different scenarios, being opportunistic for kind of openings. I think just speaking to people to understand like what's out there, like what company needs a physician, what type of advice or potential clinical expertise that they are seeking. I've seen physicians come in even just as contract basis into startups to provide some advisory role and just to get, a flavor of what it's like to be in a startup environment. Yeah. So, and then at some point you will have to decide if you want to just, fully jump into the deep end of the pool, but there's so many different things you can do and there's so many different ways to go. You just got to start by trying.
Yeah. And I think there's so many different levels of involvement that people can have. And, you could do something as simple as an advisory role, like be on an advisory board, or be more of a consultant, or like you said, a contractor. You could take a role as a clinical physician within a startup if you want a different flavor, or a leadership role. Or you could do what you and I apparently keep doing over and over again, which is just go ahead and start new companies over and over. Because once you do it once, there's a lot of translatable skills. But, you don't have to quit your job to go into startups. And I think that part of the appeal is that as an advisor, you can learn a lot about a lot of different companies. And I think that our opinions are so needed and people are eager to have them. And sometimes if you don't spend a lot of time in this space, it's hard to know what it is they're looking for and to really believe that you have that skill.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how much you and I, David, will tell them, like, no, you're a great analytical thinker. You have all these patient care experiences. You understand how patients move through the system. But the truth is, an early stage startup only has so much internal expertise. There's usually only a couple of co-founders. Maybe it's being incubated within a firm or an incubator or an accelerator, but even they are reaching out to their networks to bring the expertise for a particular concept. So when you're doing discovery, you really deeply rely on advisors. And so I think there's so many ways for physicians to get involved, even if they don't have an MBA, even if they haven't worked at Boston Consulting Group. And definitely recommend what you said, which is reaching out to people like you and I who have done this and continue to help other physicians kind of move this direction. So if people wanted to reach you, what is the best way to get in touch with you? On LinkedIn or something else?
LinkedIn and or email. I think my email should be my LinkedIn, but it's just drdavelim@gmail.com. Dr. Dr. But one word, Dr. Dave Lim.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And we can put that in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate your perspective and you coming on the show today. I think that your journey is incredibly unique, and it just shows how broad your skill set can be if you start trying this path, and how much impact you can have even outside of your specialty. So thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, no, a real pleasure, Allison, anytime, and any way I can help. And I think totally committed to helping other physicians as they think about this.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Startup Physicians. Don't forget to like, follow, and share.